So let's just start with, you're the founder, start with the origins, the reason why you thought this was a good idea and kind of your background.
Sure. Although this story gets longer the older I get, so there are lots of chapters. I started the organization at Washington High School, where I was teaching English and also working as academic advisor to minority students. That job was kind of in development. It had never existed before, and so when I started working with students of color, I found that it was interesting to me and distressing at the same time that many of the students that I'd call into my office to talk about grades and goals and that kind of thing had bad grades, goals that were well beyond the grades and courses that they had. And there seemed to be no connection, no understanding between becoming a lawyer, for example, and doing rigorous work in high school. Some students were angry with me just because I called them into the office. Some students just kind of brushed me off. And so over time, I began to, as I interacted with students more, began to see the clouds in their eyes kind of dissipate, and we could actually talk like one-on-one, sincerely and genuinely. And as I discovered more about the students that I was talking to, I found ultimately that they had no idea as to who they were culturally. And I found that that was not unusual in this demographic because we have few role models, few teachers to reflect, for the students to reflect their goals against. And often family lineages got in the way as well. So if a kid's father or mother went to school and they hadn't had a good experience, then the student didn't have a good experience either because the parents were talking negatively about the school. So one summer I spent time in Des Moines and I was asked to teach in a program called the Institute. And in that experience, I thought, wow, this is something that we could certainly use in Cedar Rapids. So when I went back, I asked my principal whether or not we could start something like that at the school where I was teaching, which was Washington High School. And he said, sure. And I think he said sure just because, I was asking a question and he liked me, and so he answered the question positively and gave us a little bit of money. And so what happened as a result of that was that I literally was kind of running students down and saying, this is a program that you need, I want you in this program, and this, that, and the other. And that's really how it started. Over the initial years, and this was 1989 when it started, the initial years, we'd have maybe 17, 18 students. And then that kind of leveled off to around 20. And the program is 30 years old now, so there's kind of a history. About in the middle of that history, we became a 501c3 standalone. And the district funds us for 25 students. So that's been our limit up to very recently. Because the need is so great, and because the program is so effective with the 25 students that we deal with, and they can repeat summer after summer, we have decided to do our own fundraising toward several goals, but one of them is increasing the number of students that we can impact every summer. So in addition to teaching students in the summertime, Eric and I go to each school monthly and check in with the students and invite them to events and see whether or not there's any recidivism and that kind of thing. So that's it in a nutshell. The background piece is interesting because my own background is not dissimilar to the students that I targeted. I grew up in a town where we were the only black family. And so I never had a black teacher until I was in graduate school. And I found myself constantly looking for myself, in what I was being taught and never finding it. I was lucky to have a dad who was a professional, and so we had books in the house and conversations and that kind of thing. But in terms of actually having been taught anything about my own culture, I was not. And the fact that I have a PhD in American Studies with a concentration in African American history and literature is directly connected to the way I grew up. So I'm continually in a state of distress because generation after generation after generation after generation has had the same experience. And somewhere along the line, you'd think people would say, you know, we really need to kind of approach this issue. It is an issue, it is important, but it hasn't happened.
So, and we'll come back to a little more of the origins of it, but I want to bring Eric in. And so talk a little bit about where you fit in, when you came in, and your approach to teaching and kind of your background as a student coming up in the Cedar Rapids Community School District, and why you thought it was important that you join this program.
I am born and raised Iowan, born in Iowa City, but raised here in Cedar Rapids. Both of my parents were in the employ of the school district. My mother worked at the Board of Education. My father started out as a third shift janitor, and then over the 38 years he was in the district, then became the district's homelessness liaison, which was a department that existed but didn't really have an individual or people. Just they had office people. And my father, that grew out of him starting by going around from junior high school to high school, drums that they were throwing out. He started a drum corps and used flag corps just in our backyard after I had aged out of being able to march in a drum bugle corps sometime. So he had contact with students regularly that then turned into that homelessness liaison program. And my academic career in Cedar Rapids wasn't one that I don't think anybody would be proud of. I mean, I know I'm not, only because I realize retroactively the necessity of taking advantage of of your academic surrounding and education being afforded you. I had one black educator in the classroom from kindergarten through 12th grade, and it was my 12th grade year, and it was Carter Bradshaw, who I think we can all agree that we don't realize the impact, whether it be positive or negative, that individuals have in our life until they're gone for an undisclosed amount of time. And starting college, I started at the bottom, and I know that's obvious, but for me, in order to become a regularly admitted student to the University of Iowa, I had to take summer school after I had graduated for 6 weeks and attain a 3.5 grade point average. And then if I was able to do that, I was admitted on a temporary basis, where then I had to attain a 2.5 for the first semester of my freshman year, and then I was admitted as a full-time student. So, and I knew, even though I didn't know, I knew that I wanted to be in college, because I didn't want to, at that time for a young kid, it's, I don't want to be at home. Right. And I don't mean necessarily in the house, I mean in my hometown.
That's it.
Right. So that's what I did, and I poured myself into that. I was able to do what I was asked, and then I was able to do what I was asked to become a full-time student. I started as a music major, but was a horrible student, and liked the performance aspect rather than the classroom aspect. And Professor Thomas Davis called me into his office, who had given me a minimal scholarship, but one that helped. He said, you know, you have to go to these music classes and you have to pass them. And I wasn't doing either, or I was doing both. I was going and not passing. I want you to find another degree, but you can keep this music scholarship, but I want you to stay in the music program, but I want you to find another degree track, because he said to me, if you practiced your, multi-percussion, whether it be a marimba or timpani, like you do that drum set, you'd be one of the best students I've had. I knew that was a compliment. So in the summer of 1992, I happened on the African American History Department, and I had a graduate student at the time named Nancy Tolson, who taught a course on children's literature. Now, this is by no fault of my parents. I did not know that there were black authors that wrote children's books. Some people would say, that's obvious to me, that of course that exists, but my track was different. And then it all started to happen for me. I ascended positively on campus in my academic classes in African American history. And then I would go to the music school and practice for 4, 5, 6 hours a day on drum set. That took me to New England Conservatory of Music, where I finished my jazz performance degree. And then in order for me to get that performance degree track from studies to performance, the then chairman of the department, Alan Chase, with whom I recorded, which I'm not trying to backslap, but it was really cool that he thought I was good enough to be on a record with him. He said, I'm going to sign this degree track change provided you finish the degree you started at Iowa. I said, I will. And at that time I met Professor Joseph Warren at Northeastern, which is just down the street from NEC. And he had been the Secretary of Education under Governor Mike Dukakis, who was also in the poli-sci department at Northeastern, who also became a professor of mine. And then I finished that and immediately went to Northeastern, and I finished African American Studies and Political Science there. Moved to New York for the purposes of playing music, but wanted to go to graduate school because I learned how to love learning, and I studied history. And I couldn't get enough of it. I finished a graduate degree at Columbia Teachers College, became a certified teacher. I taught at Massapequa High School, all the subjects in humanities by the time I left to come to Cedar Rapids, and taught the same discipline here. Dr. White, this would be now almost 4 years ago, her director at the time, Carol Bernard, was retiring from everything and moving on. And we happened to be at church together, and Carol just happened to look at me and she said, no, in fact, she was in our living room. My dad was still living here at the time, and she was getting married. And my father had taught himself how to play the harmonica. So they were discussing music, and she said, I'm leaving the program. And I just offhanded, before I left to go work with a drum corps that I was teaching at the time in South Carolina, I said, I'll do it. I'll apply. And she goes, really? I never thought of that. So then I ended the summer, and I came back, and Dr. White and I were speaking at church. She said, I never considered. She goes, and I mean no disrespect. I said, no, none taken. So I went through the process of meeting the board members and resume, background check, bio, and all that. And it wasn't just I want a job now because I've changed disciplines per se, but it from my time in Cedar Rapids, graduating high school, through college and graduate school, touring Europe and South America and the United States and Canada, and becoming more immersed in history, I realized that, and even as a teacher, I was having this struggle. Well, these history textbooks really aren't doing the job. They're really not. You have the opportunity in an advanced placement course to get figuratively deeper into the material on a micro level because you're forced to in 7 months, whereas in a, quote, normal track class, unquote, you have the full school year. So I thought, why should just 30 kids, 3 periods a day, have the advantage of really getting to know Frederick Douglass, John Brown, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, Shirley Chisholm. Why do they deserve it, but no other student does, you know? And that was the hook. That was the impetus of my application. Because a program like Dr. White's in our hometown, and the opportunity to give back to the community that gave me I'm absolutely in love with that idea. And the fight that I fought as an unknowing student, then adult as a teacher, that same fight was being fought by Dr. White when I was a student. It's being fought now, and it was being fought when she was a student. So there's much more work to be done, and engaged work by people like she and those with whom we commiserate, to try to uplift our black students in Cedar Rapids, our biracial students in Cedar Rapids, to let them see educators in front of them that not only have a passion for learning, but literally can share their cultural background.
So I want
Well
you,
done.
yeah, very, very nice. I want you to take us back to that first summer, and I will, for the sake of transparency.
Full disclosure.
Yeah, full disclosure. I was in the academy initially, and remember wholeheartedly the difference. Grew up on the west side, so we didn't even have black teachers or administrators at Jefferson. So I remember that first summer having you up in the front of the room and how different that even was. But the one thing I said then, and I say now, the level of respect that you demanded, the attention that you required was new, but so much appreciated. And after, I would say, probably was Thursday. So from Monday to Thursday, thought I could act out and saw that you weren't going to break. I straightened up. But the rest of the summer, for those other 5.5 weeks, I absolutely had a ball. So I'll say that, but as a student, you don't understand what it takes to really put something like that together. So talk about what we were being taught, even to what you're still teaching now, but pulling together that information. Because if there was one book during that summer that changed my life, was the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which I ended up reading 2 other times that year. I read it that summer, then 2 other times that year, and then read every book on Malcolm, every speech he ever put together. But it fundamentally changed me from the inside out, because I was searching for someone to identify with, and Martin was the one you always kind of looked to, but I wasn't feeling Martin from the standpoint, because I'm thinking, this dude is graduated high school at this age, he was brilliant, that ain't me, I was half, I was 50%, in the 50 percentile of my graduating class, so I was, as I tell my kids now, not as good as some, but better than the rest.
Yeah.
Average. So I was an average student. But that summer, you lit a spark. And so talk about what went into the curriculum and why you chose to do it the way you did it, and how you're still doing it now. And then, Eric, I want you to talk about a little bit about what you're adding now and what you're seeing from the students.
Okay, well, you were a firebrand.
Yes, yes.
And it's interesting to see you now, and I can see the connection between the then and the now, even though you've mellowed a little. I can see how you're raising your children, and I think that the Academy has had a little bit of influence in, the trajectory that your life has taken. I can also see why you would connect with Malcolm as opposed to Martin. But Malcolm, was not in the lexicon so much. So what we did and are still doing is ensuring a couple of things. One is that the Academy take place in a college setting. That's important so that students can see college. Many students don't have any concept of what that is like. They hear the word, they don't know what it takes to get there, they don't know what it looks like. So we were at Kirkwood, I think, when you were in the academy, and now we're at Mount Mercy. But that's at the apex of the triangle. One of the legs of the triangle requires that students be taught by people who look like them. And that is easy to say, but hard to do, because the people that we put in front of high school students have to have at least two really strong qualifications. One is that they have to know who they are. They have to be connected to the culture. And the other is that they have to be excellent in their academic discipline. So finding people like that is no mean feat, but I think we've done really, really well over the 30 years. I can remember one guy that I thought, not a good fit. But generally speaking, we've had really, really good instructors, generally from the University of Iowa, generally on the PhD track, but also generally from someplace else. And they found themselves here because of the academic advantages. You know, the university's looking for people of color as well, so here they are. So then we scoop them up. And they often stay summer after summer after summer, which is good for the kids because they can repeat. And so that all works out really well. What we do in terms of curriculum is, and I really need to understand how to not be the person that everybody looks to for approval, but I still am. So the curriculum is developed by the teachers, but then they run it by me, and I say, okay. When it comes to math and science, I say, well, you know better than I do, so I will defer to your expertise. But when it comes to the literature history, and we teach, I should kind of parenthetically insert that we teach 3 classes: a math science, a literature history, and a post-secondary seminar translated as how to get to college. And so the literature history I do have some input on. And when you were in the academy, I think we probably read more than one text. And now we're really focusing on one, kind of abutted with articles and historical input and that kind of thing. It's kind of smoothed out in that way, although if I had my druthers, we'd be reading a lot. In terms of respect and being in front of a group of African American and biracial students, and now we have a lot of African students as well, but when you were in it, it was African and biracial primarily. I go back to the time that I was teaching at Washington and had taught at Jefferson and missed you somehow, but I just was not comfortable with behaviors, you know. So what we teach is, yes, academics and rigorous academics. We're not playing, you know. This is in no way remedial, but also in what I call how to do school. You know, you've got to be on time. You've got to be prepared. You've got to have a pencil, for heaven's sake, you know, and you've got to be present. We focus a lot on listening, and now in this day and time, that's really almost a lost skill that we have to really focus on. But in front of the room, for me, meant that I wanted to be listened to. You know, I knew that I knew more than you did, and so I wanted you to hear what I had to say, because I knew, and anybody else who's in front of those students knows, that they will benefit if they will just allow themselves to open to what is there. And when we talk to parents, we have to make it very clear that a student, it's not a miracle program. You know, in 6 weeks, of a given summer, a student may not do a 180. Sometimes they do,
Right.
but they may not. And so that's why we invite students back if they demonstrate interest. They can come back because there's so much to know. I mean, we had a parent meeting just last week, and I was saying students are invited to come back because they can never learn all there is to know. You know, I don't know all there is to know. And so I demanded respect because I wanted you to hear what there was to know. And I knew that if you listened, that it could change the trajectory of your life. Nancy Tolson was one of our teachers. She was on the PhD track when we had her, when we hired her, and she stayed for 4 years, and is in a book that Akwi, who was also a director after me, gave to my grandson. So I've got this book of African American literature that's on Travell's shelf that contains a story by Nancy Tolson, who taught in the academy when she was trying to get a PhD. So, you know, there's so many kind of interconnections. The piece that I can't not mention is the travel. Because if a student is able to live up to the expectations that we set, then we go on a trip at the end of the session. And we've been criticized for taking students away because it's so expensive. You know, well, you spend most of your budget traveling with kids, and you know, why would you want to do that? You could, blah blah blah. But that's the transformational piece. You know, that opens up the world to students. And I have said before, and should probably trademark these words, because what happens is that, you know, literally, students look around and say, oh, wow, you know, this is out here. We often go to Atlanta because I have family in Atlanta, and when we were new, I was driving students 1,700 miles away from home, and I wanted some contact when I got to where we were going because I would always get lost. But when we went to Atlanta, the first couple of times, students would say, that's a black policeman. And I'd say, yeah, we don't have black policemen in Cedar Rapids. I've never seen a black policeman before. And so, you know, there's a little opportunity, you know. We'd stay in a hotel. The receptionist or the clerk at the hotel would be a black person. Wow, that lady is black. You know, I didn't know black people could do that kind of thing. And so, you know, so our secondary mission is about exposure. Opening doors, opening up awareness. And so these days I say, do not ever let a door close. You don't know whether you like what's on the other side or not, but you walk through and see, because you never know, you know, what kinds of opportunities you may have. And I will say that opportunities are greater for students of color now than they were 30 years ago. But there's still the issue of finding students to take advantage of those opportunities. So why did I stand up in front of the room and make you listen? Because I knew you'd be better off if you did. And because you needed to see a person of color in front of the room teaching so that you could reflect off of that experience. That is also why we have to have African Americans as staff people. And I say we are unapologetic about our focus on students of color. Isn't that discrimination? People are quick to say. Well, no, I am quick to say. If a white student wanted to come to the academy, would we say, no, you can't? No, we would not, because that would be discrimination. But our focus is out there in the universe. We're focusing on these students. You say that we have an achievement gap, and that is code for black students aren't achieving.
Absolutely.
And so if you know that, and I know this, then I would be remiss not to do it, given my level of expertise, given the fact that I went back to school to find myself, and given the fact that, like Eric, what I found was like, what? You know, where's all this information been? So I feel compelled to share that with students, knowing that it will make a difference. And then in a parallel track, teach them how to take advantage of whatever educational opportunities are presented to them. For young men, it's sometimes dismantling the presumption that sports are the way to success. You know, I have no problem with a sports phenom, but they are very rare. And so for all of us to say, you know, my kid's going to be a NBA or football or whatever, is foolhardy. And education is, in fact, the key. And so our students need to understand that and need to open themselves to the possibilities that we have in this district, because this is not one of those districts where, you know, the public schools are something that you avoid. You can still get an education here. I still get a good education here. And so we need to teach that to our students.
So Eric, I want you, as we both are products of the Cedar Rapids Community School District, talk a little bit about why, even in 2018, we're not seeing a much more rounded education in terms of giving all of our students an example of the contributions of people of color in this country. And if not, and since it's not, why the Academy and what you guys are doing each and every summer?
My initial reaction to that, to the first half of that question is, I feel as if there are more people that are married to the idea of the preamble to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which are two separate documents. And why would I say that? Because many people don't think they are. But the fact that they're so married to those ideas that to suggest to some that there are still issues, and they could come back and say, and you know what those standard reactions, right? You know what about the Civil War? What about Lincoln? What about Obama? Right? They'll just skip over. Okay, you just glazed over maybe 200, but that's okay. 3, yeah. What is anybody here for? But it's like, you know, if I can count on one hand and have fingers left over, and you consider that progress, then you've got a problem. I've known what the problem is for some time. And I think that's, for me, is the initial reason why there has yet to be a true investment in, let's peel back, let's pull the curtain back. What's behind there? I mean, we've all heard it in this room. You know, hey, Barack was elected. Paul Mooney said to Don Imus that after that election on Imus in the Morning, Imus said, "Isn't this great?" And Paul said, "No." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Elect 43 more, and then come back and talk to me, and neither one of us will be alive." That would be great. Okay, you can't. It's like you can't treat progress like a vending machine, because when you go to a vending machine, that sustains you for that short-term future. But I want a field to eat from. And history is the field that people refuse to walk through. And there are individuals that do. And then what are they called? They're called revisionists, whether they are, quote, right or, quote, left. From Laura Ingraham telling LeBron James to shut up and dribble, to Michael Eric Dyson and Dr. Dyson and Dr. West quibbling over President Obama's foreign policy, right? You get it on the proverbial both sides. When I think the goal is equality, at least I'm sure it is on Dyson and West side. I'm quite sure of that. Laura, I don't know. I'm not sure. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to her,
No,
but
it's too
they're just, it's the vapidity and the visceral reactions to people like Sean King. You know, and I go back to Dr. West because his most recent book, Black Prophetic Fire, he lights up, and pardon the pun, he lights everybody up in that book, and not angrily. He speaks of Greek mythology in the same chapter as Frederick Douglass. And I'm in love with Dr. Cornel West. I mean, if there's one historian, him, living, I'd absolutely love this man because he has no fear. Everybody's his brother, everybody is his sister. And he's the type of individual. Joy Reid is another, both of whom speak truth to power, yet are called radical by anybody. I think it goes back to, in my personal opinion, it's the all men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator. Okay, well now let's put your words into, now wait a minute. And you can literally find the wait a minutes in the founding of the colonies, in the enslavement of West Coast Africans, and then of natural-born black Americans in this country. Then, at the conclusion of the Civil War, the Reconstruction goes for a while, but in order for us to progress, you're going to have to stop protecting them. Okay, it's called Jim, and then Jim shows up.
Yeah.
And Jim's around, and I would argue that Jim Crow has just put on another suit in 2018. Now, am I running around saying everybody's a racist and a bigot? No, because I don't know everybody. But what I do know is that how are you implementing this into the academy? What I do know, and I've said this to some students, not all of them as of yet, and I said this to other students with whom I work, and I said it to our parents at a meeting at Mount Mercy just last week. I was born into your being the white America, okay? And John Edwards was onto something in 2004 when he said there are two Americas. He was correct. I remember him being called an idiot. His personal life notwithstanding. He said there are two Americas. He, speaking of those who have and those who have not. I would call it the white America. And I was born into that. You've had to been told to study my heroes. I read about yours. Your history textbook is from a European, Western European perspective. But in order for me to not only be boxed into a paragraph of Brother Malcolm, I had to go outside of the school and buy other books and go through the, I didn't know that moment. And so what she and I are trying to do, what she's been trying to do, and what I'm currently trying to do, is remove as many I didn't know that moments prior to them ascending into their 20s, right, or their late teens. Whether they choose to go to college or not, we promote post-secondary education, absolutely. And we're trying to paint that picture. You need to be grounded in who you are racially and ethnically and culturally, so that when something does offend you, you don't spout off and become the stereotype. See how they are? You know that comment, see? All students have to do is look at the judicial system. And whereas movies, like, well, look, Jordan Peele. Well, look. It's like, wait a minute, wait. What year is it? Could Hattie McDaniel go to the Oscars for Gone with the Wind? No. Did she win? Yeah. Could she go? No. Right? You can literally count on one hand. Okay. To them, it's progress. To me, it is awesome, but it's too late and not enough. And so what we're trying to do, we're trying to shine a light on what has happened. Why are we here? And I'm not talking about enslavement or ships. I'm talking about why are we human beings here right now? Why is this community what it is? Why is that building across from Jeanette? Why is that built? Why is my house is right down the street? Why are we here? Who lived here? Who lived up there? Right? So that when you are confronted with somebody who doesn't know as much as you, rather than look down on them and have to hide your disgust for their lack of intelligence, you help them. I was taught well. I learned who I am. I may disagree, as an example, I could disagree with Dr. White on an issue, but if we are both in possession of factual data, married to an opinion, that's one thing. Facts are something else. Then you can go into the world and be a more learned individual, right? And you can contribute rather than just be a part of the noise. That's what we do.
So where is our education system in general? As we know, our Secretary of Education is lacking in any understanding of what is necessary. But what can local school districts, ours, specifically do in order to start filling in those gaps? What is necessary outside of programs like the Academy? What are a couple, three things that would be necessary to do today to change the trajectory of all of our students, but more specifically our African American students and African students?
Well, I'll go first
Sure,
because
go
you
ahead.
can fill in, he
Go
can
ahead.
fill in details.
Go ahead.
I'm going to do a broad base. The first thing I think that has to happen is an acknowledgement of the issue. And I have been here through maybe 7 superintendents, and I feel as though we're on a treadmill, and we are going over the same ground and making little progress, two steps forward, 1 step back. So that it wouldn't be true to say there's nothing that's been done. But I think it would be true to say that there's nothing that's been done that has been done consistently over time so that it takes root. We keep going over the same issues. So that's the first thing. The second thing, from my perspective, is that our district should, and I'll be very candid, and I've said this to the superintendent, so I don't mind saying it to you. Instead of spending money on bringing in programs and consultants and people who profess to have a lock on this issue, spend that money here, locally, on us, certainly on us, but also on other people of color who know our community, who know our students, and who could have a much more intimate kind of connection with them. I could count maybe 2 hands full of efforts to deal with the achievement gap over the years. We bring in this guy, we bring in this guy, we bring in this program, bring in this author. We use this person, we use this concept, we use this strategy. And we're still where we were when I got here, maybe a little bit further back from that. And so that's my frustration, my personal frustration. The third thing is that there has to be a way to get some people of color in front of these kids. We were at the community cultural celebration that Civil Rights Commission did in collaboration with the library just week before last. And
So we could go Saturday?
a week ago Saturday, yes. And it's interesting because I keep seeing things, go in cycles, everything old is new again. We were talking to this man whose son was with him and telling him about the program. He's very interested, kids in elementary school, so the expansion would be the program for him. The expansion, again, parenthetically, is for elementary school students. It's housed at Johnson STEAM Academy. But he was sharing a story through which he told us that his little boy had gotten in trouble at his elementary school in Marion because they were doing a project and students were to take roles of people in history, and they were talking about the Mayflower and the Pilgrims, and this little boy was was assigned a role as somebody on the Mayflower. And he piped right up and said, my people weren't on the Mayflower. That doesn't apply to me. He's 8. And because he said that, he got in trouble. That has to stop. And that keeps happening in various incarnations all the time. The kid could be called insolent, a behavior issue. But in fact, this was a bright boy who knew enough of his history to know he didn't belong on the Mayflower. And his father said, they squeezed the spirit out of it. So we don't want that to happen. We want our young people to be confident in who they are. We want them to know about their history and their heritage and their culture, so that the teacher doesn't presume that the Mayflower is the end-all be-all, and all of the children in the classroom have to be a part of the Mayflower situation, even if there's a little black boy who has no connection with the Mayflower. Now, I'm sure that from her perspective, and I'm projecting here, she thought she was doing the right thing because she was including this child. But in her, what's the trending phrase now? Unintentional bias? She was totally unintentional in her bias, but her bias was real. And so here's this little 8-year-old, and the process has begun. So the district absolutely must deal with issues like that. Much of what we don't get taught because teachers don't know it to teach. They haven't been taught it. And so then we go back to our institutions of higher education and see what's going on in the teacher training programs and that kind of thing. But it has been happening for so long that it strikes me that somebody should be able to see it as clearly as I do. And I'm not shy about telling every superintendent that I come across. But Dr. White has many mantras that she shares with students. And the one that she shares with adults is, nobody ever listens to me. Nobody ever listens to me. The drill it down to be very specific, not that she wasn't, but I know she does, I do. We're aware of the quantity of schools. So that shouldn't go without saying, because it's known. And we also know that we have a primary focus. Both of us having taught day to day, we took great pride, and still do, with what we did or do, and that's all we do. So when a kid, for example, would bring a piece of paper to me, regardless of school, I have to go, because we're singing it, I go, I really don't care. You have to take this. Syllabus, right? That's the singular focus. So in meeting with the district and in treading trodden trail about these academic issues, we're aware of the gravity of that situation in terms of, we know you can't just worry about us, you also have to deal with that. However, if this is still on this paper, it's 2018, and we've been talking about this since 1989, something is wrong. What is wrong? So I think there needs to be true investment in neighborhood. And I don't mean financially, time. Time is more valuable than money. Those suits and power suits and pantsuits and dresses and skirts, jeans, whatever they're wearing, need to physically be in the neighborhood and let these people see those faceless names, in my opinion. Now, converse, this isn't all outward. What has to happen from our community, and I'm literally talking about this neighborhood and the like, need to accept the try. And I know there are people in my neighborhood that have been in it as long as I've been on the earth.
in some cases twice as long. And my grandmother, rest in peace, forget them. Why do I want to talk to them? They're a different person, same face. Therein lies the problem. In terms of, well, you guys haven't really reached out to them, and then you come back to them and say, well, you haven't reached out to them. You're casting your line out, and the people that are grabbing it are the people that financially can, materially can. Look at how you schedule your meetings, your PTA meetings. When do you schedule it? Now, do you know the neighborhood? Do you know the financial breakdown of the neighborhood? The percentage rate of those who are academically scoring poor and those who don't come from a financially solid home, it shouldn't shock you that there may be commonality. At that point, you do other research, right? You don't just say, well, here's the problem, and throw out that vague, what do we do? Because people who honestly don't care will turn to their phone or open their book in that meeting. And a couple people that always kind of make decisions will kind of make that decision. And they'll just, it's like they could bring a mirror and talk to that. That's where the decision is going to come from with the person that looks like them. Or you literally go to Bethel, literally go to Mount Zion, literally go up the street to Jane Boyd, not at 10 in the morning, go at 4:30 in the afternoon, and speak to the third graders, the fourth graders, the fifth graders, and wait for their mom, dad, or whomever's picking them up, and literally ask them, how do you feel about the district? Don't send a Scantron home. That's it. Scantron light bill. Which one am I going to worry about? And then I'll blame the district for not teaching my kid. And that's where the parents, you need to invest in your kids. You need to take stock in what they're doing and not point at the district for not doing a job, because if you do this, there are 3 things you're not doing. So but I would say, of the 2, the district has the opportunity. Those in positions of academic power have the opportunity and the means to get, because those who are they're servicing don't. But that's not their fault. But there needs to be a meet in the middle. That's what I think happens. I think too many times one side or the other will just solely point. But where we're coming from, after investing what will be most of if not the rest of my life, and I know it's going to be the rest of hers. Well, at any given moment, I just want to make sure. But I know, she's got more years behind her than ahead of her. But what I'm saying is that we're married to education. And I love that she has said, maybe I haven't been paying attention that much over the past couple of years, but recently I've heard her say a lot, we are unabashedly and not ashamed to say pro-black. You're right. Because there are so many people that are pro-black means anti-white. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. What's going to happen on Saturday? This Saturday is St. Patrick's Day. There'll be a lot of Irish in this town. And some who aren't, right? On the 5th of May, everybody's going to be Hispanic for some reason, right? I don't recall in the month of February everybody all of a sudden becoming black. I do know that people are like, it's Black History Month, okay. Hey, thanks for telling me about what I didn't know. Dude, you should have known this. You should have known Malcolm X didn't start the Black Panthers because he was dead. I mean, there are simple things like that, right? So there's acknowledgement on both sides, and there has to be, there has to be the people on our side in the community need to feel the honesty, and you need to speak with honesty on that other side of the table. And if you don't know, ask. How can we improve our district, rather than just picking a couple, say, well, see, we hired, or look what we've started. Invest, like literally, and don't be afraid to talk about things that others are afraid to talk about. You said, how do we make this literal in terms of these students? We, this past fall, had an opportunity to talk about the NFL season. Now, as a historian, I could marry Colin Kaepernick to the 1800s and to the 1900s. And that's not to say that no one else could. Those students probably couldn't. That's just because they're the age that they are. And so what are they hearing? He hates America, he hates the flag, he hates the troops. When he literally came out and said why, it's the wind tunnel of hate. And it's not a coincidence that everybody that took a knee with him shared his skin tone or familial lineage, and even the federal government spoke out about it. But when our own government won't stand for other countries, that's seen as power and American pride. There's a problem there. There's a problem. And you can bring that to the classroom. Students suffered with that at one of our high schools this past year. In December of 2016, going into January 2017, students were suffering with outward, vocal demonstrations of stupidity and ignorance. And they confided mostly in she, because she allowed them to contact her directly and say, if you need some, we say, contact us. They contact mom. Hey, they're saying, hey, they said, hey, we went and we spoke with them about it. And that's, it's just, I think 2 steps forward, 2 steps back is a great concept, but I also think, man, we're trying to make strides academically, and now globally, if not nationally, there's this, which then it just permeates down, and I don't mean down to say that the states are lower than the government, but it comes to our town, and we see our literal physical students dealing with these issues that they're dealing with in Los Angeles or Chicago or Austin, right? New York City, Boston. That's what I try to do, is show them you can't lash out violently, because we do want to. But if you are armed with facts, you'll be hated more. You have to be willing to be hated.
Yeah, and regarding the Kaepernick situation, just to use as an example, we're all about academics and facts, but underneath all of that is trying to teach students the ability to think, to parse, to figure out what's real and what's not, which is becoming more and more difficult in this day and time, so that when they hear things about somebody like Colin Kaepernick being called a sellout, being called disloyal, being called anti-military, being called whatever he's being called, they can say, wait a minute, let me find something that gives me the facts about this. I cannot believe what I see on the evening news or what I read on my phone or what, that will suck you in and weaken you, as opposed to your being able to think for yourself or have a cogent discussion with others who may or may not agree with you, but that is factually based. So that's very important. The listening piece is important, but also the thinking piece is very important.
I didn't know that President Obama had written multiple books, one of which was a children's book. And he wrote it in 2010. I didn't know this. I saw it yesterday. And each page, he wrote it for his daughters. And on each page, the theme is that you're strong and beautiful, you're courageous. And each page is a different American figure. And each time on the right side of the page, and there are caricatures, an artist drew them. They're drawn doing what they do. And then you turn the page, and they've joined Malia and Sasha as their height. And so you are a collection of all these people. That's what the book becomes. Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, Jackie Robinson, George Washington. And there are more individuals. Those are the ones that just popped in my head. But it's a beautifully written book, and it's big. But it's that book, I think, is paramount, and the idea is paramount. Like, you are a collection of everything here. Don't be ashamed to understand. You can't be afraid to study it. It's you start out by saying, look, this is how it happened. It's sad, it's angering, it's happy. If anything, and I'm not ashamed to say this, if anything, a black student, or biracial, I would say that it's great because I have the best of both worlds, but I also have the worst. The black student, you understand, through all this, the enslavement, the murders, the lynching, right? Black men served their country in World War I, the Civil War, World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen. I mean, come on, right? And through all that, through black codes, through Jim Crow, through Malcolm X being out, silenced for 90 days and then coming back after his Hajj and saying, you know, blacks, we need some black unity before we have total racial unity, being killed for it. Dr. King talking about, look, we got to vote. I mean, we were guaranteed this in 1870. What happened? 6 years later, you took that away from us, right? And through all that, you need to be proud of the stick-to-itiveness, and don't allow the sadness and the anger to consume you and make you hateful. But don't be patronized by it. And I think that's what, I think schools patronize students too much. And then come to them, and I'm not trying to be funny, but in February, hey, we're thinking about, because they did it to me. That was when I had a flat top, and they were like, hey, we need some drums in February. I said, that's the only month you need them? And just don't allow yourself to be patronized, and man, be armed with this passion and knowing who you are, so that you won't be just the first one in your family. You'll be the beginning of the next one.
Well, I am grateful. Thank you guys, not just for speaking truth to power, but for educating our kids, for teaching them how to think. Because if they don't learn how to think, they're going to have that much more trouble later on. And as I can tell you personally, thank you for encouraging me to be a much better student and to learn the necessary individuals that came before me and paved the way for my children now, and your continued work and diligence and shaping our young minds. So this was excellent.
Good.
Keep up the fight. We still have a long way to go.
No doubt.
But without what you guys are doing, there would be a huge, much bigger gap with our kids of color in this district. And so you guys are an example of what is necessary, but also what's working. And so please continue the good work. Thank you.
Well, Karl, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to explain.
Yes.
Vent.
Yes. Well, actually, we've been on for 2 hours.
Yep.
I only had this room till 11:30, so I'm like, I probably should cut this short.
Let me see if I can extend this just a little bit longer. Remember, Karl, we went to Dr. Moore's.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that as you were talking. I was going to talk about should black students only be taught by black teachers, but at that point it was like 11:23, and I said, yeah. And then Eric got to talk. I said, I don't know if I'm going to get to it, but if we have a few more minutes, have at it.
Yeah, if you all have, the question he posed, he showed. Did you go to the thing he did?
No, Eric wasn't there.
Yeah, okay.
No.
Anyway, he had a screen full of pictures, and all of them.
Oh, you told me about this.
Most of them were, of renowned black people, and he said, what do all these people have in common? He said, well, they came up in education during segregation days, and they were taught to be leaders, and they were taught to be, proud of who they were. And so the question he had was, can a white teacher do for kids of color what black teachers did for this generation? So that's, I wonder, and the focus you all have is to be sure that the kids that you're focused on see people teaching them who look like them.
Right.
So that's one question. The other question is, I think, Dr. White, you mentioned how important it was for kids in our public schools to be able to see somebody who looks like them teach them. And so I wonder how important is it for white students to see people of color teaching them? And I admit I come out of I was came to maturity during the civil rights era, and I was a integrationist liberal and all of that stuff. So that's kind of one of the touchstones for me.
Right.
You know, how do we get white people over the hump here, or at least so that they're not riding people of color all the time. So those are two things I wondered about, and I don't know if you all are interested in addressing those or not.
Well, sure, but how much time do you have? The short answer to your question is yes. Black students need to see themselves reflected. White students need to see black teachers in positions of power in front of them. I was one of the only ones. And I will tell you that some students veered away from me toward somebody else. And I know, as certainly as I'm sitting here, that part of it had to do with the fact that, you know, I wasn't white, am not white. However, the students who did venture into my classroom were so glad they did, you know, because their experience was shaped a little bit differently. And they could leave my room and go, you know, other places in terms of their educational careers and not have that reluctance, you know. They were not fearful of the black lady because they had been taught by the black lady. So as is another kind of trending phrase, we all benefit. You know, when we do things right and equitably, we all benefit. Now, you also talked about a hump, and that's where you know, Eric can take over, because I've been trying to get over that hump for, what did you say? I have more years behind me. For all those years behind me. You know, from when I was a student and had no black role models. I say again, I was lucky I had a family and siblings because they were my insulation. But in terms of trying to get the populace to say, you know, we would all be better if we had training programs that produced as many well-educated, well-versed black teachers as we have white teachers. I can't say, because I'm the skeptic in the crowd. Maybe not, but I'm the skeptic in the crowd. And for a while, I thought we were moving in the right direction. Then we had an election and we moved way back, and people took off their masks and put on their cloaks. And so, you know, I'm just doing what I do now. I'm not fighting that battle because it's not as close to being won as I thought it was.
I think all students, I think, deserve to be taught by teachers. I know you know what I mean when I say this. All students need to be taught by teachers who aren't white. All colors, all races deserve that. That doesn't mean that white folks shouldn't do it, because they clearly do it in the majority.
And some do it well.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, look, I honestly wouldn't have the degrees I have if I just had to go to school, and you'll attain your degrees, but you're gonna have to have at least 10 black professors, then I wouldn't have degrees. I wouldn't have them. And that's at the university level, but those are private institutions, and I'm not backslapping again, but it's like from Northeastern to New England Conservatory in Columbia, one? I'm excluding Iowa, one.
But, you know, Eric, you alluded to the fact that this is a two-way street.
Yeah.
And looking back at my own upbringing, there was nobody who looked like me.
Right.
But I can certainly remember when I was 7 years old and my mother took me to dance class and said to the lady, and this is my genteel mom, I hope I don't have to come over here and talk to you about the way you're treating my child. She said that. And my dad, they were the ones who said, you are Trotter children. You have to exceed to our expectations. Don't be bringing any C's in this house. And so we need more of that kind of investment from our own end, so that no matter who teaches us, we are able to succeed.
My experience with that literal phrase in terms of you can't bring that here, my experience with that has been in every year of parent-teacher conferences or back-to-school night or get to know them day, more times than not I said this way, I was no good at history. So she or he is struggling, well, that's because I don't like it. That's a problem. And you alluded to it earlier, just because a parent or a person that's a guardian has a problem with academics doesn't mean the child should, right? That because on the one hand it is a piece that you can use to ascend in community and society, but you've got to make sure that you invest in your student, and even though if you didn't like it, try to help it. If you can't, seek help for them, and also tell them that if you're talking about Black American history, you don't need a black person talking about it. The person who is in front of you just needs to know it, know it literally.
Right.
It doesn't matter their shade, okay? And that's a problem that's a social problem. Black folks want to talk about black stuff. White people don't talk about everything else. That has to go away.
Yes, one other question it came up during the conversation, during our time here together, and just look at us. I mean, Carl's very dark. We go from
A
very
spectrum.
dark
Yeah.
to,
Like we literally are the hue. Look at this, how this is darker.
so like, the question is, does that make a difference in the way people are viewed in educational contexts, or for teaching positions, or in classrooms? Does the shade make a difference?
I had a question when I was interviewing for my job at Massapequa High School. The then superintendent said to me, now, if you're going to be teaching global history, so yeah, what if a student makes a derogatory comment, a racist comment, because this community is 99% Greek and Italian and Irish? I said, I'm used to that. I said, how are you going to handle that? I said, well, the phrase at the time was teaching moment, right? And I don't know if I dropped that, but I said, that'll be an opportunity to engage on a topic that they may be literally foreign, it may be a foreign entity to them. And I know I was, because I and another teacher, we were the two darkest things in the building. You're not threatened by that? No, because I've always lived in this.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a part of this. You're the one that's concerned when you go into Brooklyn or Bed-Stuy or Queens or Flushing. You're afraid, not me. I'm completely comfortable everywhere. You're not comfortable everywhere. And for what it's worth. I mean, I think, and I also think you said, does it make a difference? I think in possession of facts and unafraid to look at the bad, this doesn't matter, because you've devoted yourself to intelligence, the consumption of knowledge, and truth and honesty. And you'll find that those of these different colors can commiserate with one another and hang out. And the four of us don't even talk about that. But there would be somebody, if you went to the mall and swung a bat and dragged them here and woke them up. Why is that white guy talking to those three non-white people? That's one of the first questions that person may ask. I'll be honest with you, Even though I'm used to it, I could be uncomfortable sometimes going to Parlo City. I'm 46. You imagine what a 16-year-old feels like going to high school? Black one?
Yeah.
And the biracial one is being told, being raised black. Oh, you're trying to be white. That's another reason why I do what I do. Because I want kids like, literally kids like me, to say, you know what, you don't have to choose. Be a strong, independent person and love both.
Right.
You don't have to choose,
Right.
right?
Which is easier said than done.
Correct.
Because and this is a whole sociological study.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a whole lot of strife and counterproductivity within the race. And so the short answer to your question, does hue make a difference? Yes, it does. But again, if you peel back the layers and understand why that is, that will certainly color, no pun intended, your perspective. You know, I can remember, you know, in my own household, my mom saying to me, when my sister called me an old black thing, don't you ever say that to your sister again. If you knew the history of this family, you would know why they're different colors.
I said the word colored, and my dad got angry at me.
And the thing I've said to kids in high school is, the browner you are, the purer you are. And if you are anything, you know, toward this end, there's been some adulteration going on somewhere along the line. And then we, as people of color, value in lots of different ways that connect to race the further away from the dark-skinned.
Absolutely.
You know, that's yes.
This may be useless or not, but I keep thinking about, you remember, he just signed a new contract with the San Francisco 49ers. He was talking about sports. Richard Sherman, when he was interviewed, when they were going to the Super Bowl by Aaron Andrews, I remember my friends, most of whom were white at that time. I was in South Carolina when they won that. He rattled off loudly a bunch of stuff that I could understand, and he's a character. I don't like that. That's you know, Manny being Manny, right? But he was really a lot of bravado.
Right off the field.
Right, he was, emotional. They just won an Aaron Andrews, and when he was very engaged and emotional. If you pause that, look at her face. She is she's either A, offended by the volume or the tone, or just uncomfortable. But there's more to that frozen picture, because everybody called him a loud, angry black man, loud thug.
Yeah, he's a thug.
This brother graduated with a 3.5 from Stanford. He's about to go to something he's never been to, and you're going to check him on the way he's responding? But let Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Brett Favre or Drew Brees get happy? Oh, look at his son with the headphones on. That's so cute and beautiful. Now you're just splitting hairs. Yeah, you're right, I am. That kind of stuff. So if the athlete is an academic, that blows a lot of people's minds.
I understand it.
Exactly.
Can't get
Absolutely,
into that.
because as long as you can run and catch, right, or hurdle, or shoot, you're doing your job. My father and I talk about that because he's in Arkansas. He said, I wonder where all these racists go on Monday. Because on Saturday, they're in the football stadium. They're watching the University of Arkansas. Yeah, they're just go. And it doesn't matter. You know, when Nolan Richardson was the head coach at the University of Arkansas, they were killing folks.
Yeah,
Pushed him out.
Yeah.
What happened on Monday, Tuesday? What are they called on Monday through Friday? I mean, it's a big topic.
Yeah, it's
Go
a
on and on.
big topic.